button. Great. What I would love to do is introduce this fabulous group of humans who I've actually known for quite some time, some of you. So it's lovely to have you be a part of this event. And so the goal for this event is really, it's an AMA. I have some questions that I will be asking all of you, but I would very much encourage people to use the chat to please go in and ask your questions, and I'll be asking them as we go. But what I would love to do is just start by learning a little bit about what each of you do and a little bit about Proletariat. So I leave it to you, whoever would like to start.
All right, I'll go first. My name is Sarah, and I'm the People Operations Lead at Proletariat. So our group operations primarily takes care of all of the kind of administrative stuff, the people stuff, facilities, maintaining our office when we're actually there, you know, anything related to kind of culture, benefits, all of that fun stuff. So we cover a lot of bases, and we have a really good group of people here today to kind of showcase the various other areas that you know, we employ in at Proletariat. So so yeah, Tori, do you want to go next?
Sure. I'm Tori Schafer. I am Proletariat's content/narrative designer. I take care of story content and future content that will be narrative based.
We're popcorning.
I can go next.
Okay.
I am Kristen Carter-Ogles. I am the senior 3D character artist at Proletariat. So I make all of the 3D character assets that are in our current project, Spellbreak, and our previous projects too, but this is the one we're currently very excited about.
Awesome.
Just getting rid of my phone. Didn't want it buzzing on my desk. And hi, I'm Stef. I am an associate product manager at Proletariat. So I work on the product team, making sure that any of the high-level vision for the direction that the game wants to go in terms of the features that we have available in the game for all of our players continues in the direction that we're going for, or if there are any high-level decisions to change that direction, working with the product team to figure out, okay, which features do we need in the game in order to accomplish certain goals.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. So now that you've shared a little bit about what each of you does, can you talk a little bit about Proletariat and what makes it different from most gaming companies?
I'll start with talking a little bit about Proletariat. To be completely honest, actually, this was my first game industry job, so I don't have a lot of comparison there, but I can talk about a lot of, you know, our values and the things that we do care about. So Proletariat, just in general, is a game studio, if you guys aren't already aware, and we're currently working on Spellbreak, which is very exciting. We're getting a lot of really good traction. We're still in a closed beta phase, which means that the game is pretty much out there, but not fully complete yet. So we're excited about the current state of the project, and we're hiring like crazy. So to give a little bit of a background, we were a very small company. Kristen was actually one of our very first employees. She's the most tenured here. And when I joined, we were at a little over 20. We're almost at 70 people now, which is really, really awesome, exciting, crazy. And yeah, we've got a whole bunch of really talented people across art disciplines, engineering disciplines, product. We've got a bunch of producers who are amazing in terms of keeping us all organized. So there's a good variety of roles that we're kind of expanding into as we're growing, which is really awesome.
Awesome. Does anyone else want to add? Has anyone had a job in at a different gaming company?
I have. So I used to work for a very large company, ZeniMax Online Studios, which was, you know, I worked in Elder Scrolls Online. It's a very large game, an MMORPG, very large company, hundreds of people. What I like about Proletariat is that because we're a smaller company comparatively to AAA. There's a lot of communication between disciplines. There's a lot of communication between teams. I have contacts with the art teams, cosmetics, you know, making different character looks and different items for the game, as well as that. I have contact with the world building team and the level designers. I can easily contact any of the programmers if I have any issues, things like that, producers. You know, I've worked with Stef like yesterday on achievements, and I've worked with Kristen tons of times on outfits and stuff. And Sarah, of course, you know, she's just helped me, you know, when I joined, you know, 2 months ago. Around that. And I will tell you that, I mean, I know a lot of people in this industry. I've been in with it in the industry about 3+ years now. Proletariat has a very good reputation for a good reason. We are very open. Everybody's very respectful. We have open communication, honest with each other. You feel like you're actually contributing something to to the company, and that contribution is appreciated, respected, and will do something great for the game. Which is why I'm really excited on a narrative, to be a part of the narrative content team, to like really help with the story and develop what that story is and develop how we share that with our players and things like that. And like my contributions are making a huge impact on the game, just as everybody's contribution, I think, is.
Awesome. Anyone else want to add to that at all? Because what I would love to do is I would love to talk about the actual games a little bit. Because I think that sometimes it can be really intimidating, especially for people who aren't gamers. And Proletariat seems a little bit more accessible. So maybe you can talk a little bit about how that's cool.
I can talk about like our games specifically and the kind of games we've made. So I was one of the first people hired. I started in 2015, and I came from a background in teaching. So I taught 8 years at Full Sail University in Florida, teaching what I do. So teaching video game character art and also art for like film and cinematics. So when I started at Proletariat, we were working on a mobile game. So it was a zombie game. Which is actually would be a fun play if we were playing it right now during COVID. But it was called World's Domination. It's no longer live, but we were iOS, Android. It did pretty well when it first came out. Let's see, I started January of 2015, it launched. They were well into it by the time I started. It launched in February. So we worked on that for, continuing to support that for about a year before we started looking at what's next. And so we did kind of like, we started working on a project called Streamline. So we went from this mobile game to working on a PC game for the first time using totally different tool, like we were using the Unreal Engine, a totally different tool set than what we were using to develop on mobile. And then we were doing something where it was integrated into Twitch so that streamers could interact with their players and they could, get feedback live and do kind of like little mini games with them as they were playing this like very motion driven game, like 3D motion driven, like kind of like a tag sort of game. And it was like, fun and pop. And, we worked on that for like another year or so. And unfortunately that one, I think maybe it was a little bit ahead of its time. And so like the streamers want to play the games they want to play. They don't want to play a new game just to like go to their audience to get their, so they, they'll stick to like their tried and true. So it was a harder sell than we thought it was going to be. So, I mean, immediately we knew we had to find what was next. And we started prototyping a bunch. And this was a really interesting, but also really fun phase for the studio where we were trying out a few different things. We had different teams kind of working on different projects. And we're talking about a small studio with multiple projects happening at the same time. So people kind of helping out where they could, almost felt like game jam, like, like making something really, really quickly to do these prototypes, to like, proofs of what the games would look like. So we tried a bunch of those And we settled on what would eventually become Spellbreak. So we wanted to do a battle royale. We started out with it was a Viking theme. And throughout this process, everybody is evolving their skill sets. So for me, that meant that I went from doing things that were essentially, 3D rendered out to 2D sprites, very flat, to a full 3D game where it was, it was just like, the quality of the 3D had to really be there. It was much more like a game, like a traditional video game art, rather than something rendered to sprite, which is a bit more forgiving. And then also I was able to kind of pull in some of my background doing things more for film, in that I was able to kind of push our modeling standards up. And so by the time we got to Spellbreak, I got to really have a voice in what those characters look like and how far we could take them. And I had proven it along the way that this works, that this is a method that actually works for what we want to make, and got to be a part of the look development of the whole thing to what we ended up with now. So that game started out as a kind of a Viking VR, kind of like creeping through the woods. And then we were like, Vikings don't creep, what are we doing? And we had different parts of the design team who wanted to add RPG elements into it and have more, and have like more character, like, doing a character build as you go, which isn't really a thing in VR, in battle royales, BRs. And we got this blend that eventually became Spellbreak, which is a game that stars badass magic slinging battle mages. And I can let other people actually go into the specifics of it, but that's what we turned into. And then it's evolving beyond that now as we look at launch and what content we're doing after launch, when there's like very successful titles out there like Fortnite, that we want to learn from what they've done and what they've done well, but we also don't want to do exactly what they do. And that is a little bit of like the proletariat spirit in there, of we want to put our own twist on it, make it like a little bit different, a little bit unique, and maybe think a little bit beyond what's going on right now in the games industry.
Yeah, and I think to Kristen's point too, kind of circling back to what you had asked about, people coming into the games industry from outside of the games industry, is that kind of adding that extra element, after the initial game goes out, of, what else can we do and what kind of new things can we do? And a lot of our hiring outside of the games industry only helps that, because we're getting more, diverse perspective that's not necessarily your standard gamer or anything like that. We have a lot of employees who have never worked in games before that really do contribute great ideas. And it's not only for the game, but also just for the company as a whole. The success of us, working together, everybody's, various backgrounds and interests and all of that really kind of play into us staying creative within Spellbreak, but as a company as well.
Love that. Does anyone else want to add anything before I go to our very first live question?
Yay.
Okay. I'll read it out. So Valencia writes, I'm graduating in May with a computer science degree. Congratulations. What a bizarre time to graduate, with a focus on game programming, but I love story writing too. How would you suggest how to get into the game industry? Because she doesn't have a lot of experience in the industry, but wants to be a part of it.
Oh, I can start this if y'all are okay with that.
Yeah,
Go for it.
So first of all, game jams are a great way to learn how to build a game from scratch, but also to create a portfolio. Excuse me, I'm just coughing in the middle of my sentence.
As long as it's not COVID.
No, it's okay.
Okay.
No. So for example, my husband, when he applied for his current position, he's an engineer. He had a game that he created in classes that used the same engine as the company was using, and that was really impressive because they knew that he had experience in that engine and things like that. Oh, thank you for adding the game jam definition. Yeah, so it's basically like one weekend you partner up with a couple of people. You can do this remotely as well as there might be a local studio nearby you that will open up their doors and let you come in so you can meet other people. And and you create a game that weekend and it's very quick and things like that. You can also create a game with, by yourself or with other people. There's a lot of I think programs and stuff out there. Another good way to get into entry, I mean, I don't know, with a computer science degree, I don't know if it would be necessary, but I started out in QA, quality assurance. So quality assurance testers, you apply, you get in. It's like, it is a career path, like 100%, but it's also a way that you can get experience in the industry, and it's a little less of a gateway to get into it because they're, computer science would be a great background to do QA, so you can do quality assurance for like our programming and stuff in our game, and understand it better. And that can be a way to get your foot in the door. Another way is just make connections, go to conferences, hand out business cards, follow people on Twitter and hopefully they'll follow you back, things like that. Networking, basically. So getting to know people and putting your name out there so that, next time we have an engineer, like a junior engineer position, maybe I'll think about you and I'll contact you, or, I'll put your name in a bin. Not a bin, but I'll put your name in a hat for us and things like that. Yeah, so and if for storytelling as well, I mean, you're thinking game writer or a game narrative person, again, that can be same way, game jams, networking, QA is a good way to get your foot in the door. But just creating a portfolio, a website is a super important thing as well. I have a website full of like examples of my writing, videos of games that I've made and things like that people can peruse and look through. And like, for example, the people at Proletariat, where I work now, looked through that portfolio to see like my writing samples. I also submitted writing samples to see like if I could create a writing and stories that are good for the game as well. So yeah, a bunch of different things. Anything to add, other people besides me?
I would just give a +1 to the networking is everything statement. I think there's kind of this notoriety about the game industry that it's kind of this once you're in it type thing. But I think that sort of stereotype comes from the fact that the games industry in particular is really small. So once you're working in it, it's kind of actually inevitable that you're going to end up knowing a lot of people in the industry, just because everyone does know everyone, and everyone, or not everyone, but a lot of people have jumped between a lot of different studios and have a lot of experience in a bunch of different disciplines and studios and things like that. So really, even just getting to one event and getting to know a few people can go a really long way, because you also never know who those people are going to know. And if those people are already in the games industry, there's a very high chance that they know a lot of people and can connect you even a couple of degrees of separation away to someone that can really help you out and either mentor you or help you find a job or help give you some direction. Because that's kind of what happened to me. So, and I'm really grateful for it.
Awesome.
There's also Discord channels. I'm part of a Womxn IGDA Discord and a women's mental health Discord, which is a non-binary woman and feminine leading people. So joining one of those, we have a lot of students in there who like get advice or get questions, people starting out in the industry who can kind of get that direct mentorship as well.
That is awesome. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, the Facebook groups too. I know the women in gaming group, that whenever there's someone that's relevant to what I'm doing, if I like check their portfolio out, I always send that on to our hiring managers. That's just really, because it's like, flag this. I know we're not hiring, but I think this person, let's reach out to them if they're still available when we are.
There's a bunch of questions that came in, but I have two sort of follow-up questions. One is, could someone come up with a list of, or if there's a link to a list of all the places where people can go to sort of network in this space? Like, you just listed a whole bunch of stuff. That would be awesome, and I'm happy to share it.
I could send it to our to Marion, our part of our hiring team, so he could send that your way.
Awesome.
So I think that'd be the best way to coordinate that.
Perfect. Thank you. And then, given everything that's happening right now, game jams are so cool. I had not heard of it before. Are people doing them virtually now? That's great. Get those links.
I think Game Jam has an official website which talks about it. I can send you that as well.
All right, let me get into some of these other questions. So Gilbert asks, Are some aspects of game design applied to other industries aside from filmmaking, like narrative or storytelling? Sometimes it comes up in product design or marketing.
So I do product work. This is technically my first job in product management, but my previous job was working in sort of like a product/project manager role in customer support fraud for Microsoft, which is like, seems like it's way different, but a lot of the skill set is actually the same for both. I would say if you are a person who is interested in business and in product management or project management, there is a whole lot of overlap because at the end of the day, from that perspective, a product is a product, and you kind of go in with the same methodology regardless of what the product is. You're still going to be pulling data and tracking metrics and coming up with certain features from a high level perspective, whether you're designing a battle royale game like we are, or if you're designing, I don't know, like a mobile app for, you know, anything. You're still going to be asking like, okay, like what do our customers want? What can we deliver them? How can we do that? And all of that at a very high level is in my experience and opinion, pretty much exactly the same. It just is, like all industries, a different industry, and just a very specific one. So at least in the way that I work, yes, there is a lot of carryover.
Yeah, we see a lot of it in our applicants as well. A lot, I think you mentioned film, you know, there's a lot of crossover there with the different types of, you know, let's say VFX artists or just art in general. I think Kristen might be able to speak to that a little bit more intelligently than I can, but you know, we have a lot of other roles that would apply to other industries as well, such as QA. Our producers are essentially project managers, like on acid, but they're so there's a lot of skills that can cross over that don't necessarily just have to apply to games.
Awesome. And one of them actually, the next question is related about UX design. I'm assuming is another one that's probably very a translatable skill.
Yeah, for sure. We see a lot of crossover there as well. So yeah,
I love that.
A good, healthy industry.
I love that. And I think we had, and Alyssa had asked a question about, do you have to be an actual gamer to work in games, which I know we touched on before. So just to reiterate.
Yeah, you know, it's interesting. We have a lot of positions that we would say that, you know, game experience or interest in games is a plus. And a lot of that's more because it's really specific to certain roles. So our business development manager position, for example, that actually, you know, it's a requirement that you've got connections within the industry, because that, you know, is super, super important for that kind of role specifically. But outside of that, the answer that I gave earlier is just that, you know, we are looking for diverse perspectives. And so that includes non-gamers or people that are, you know, brand new to games, or, you know, people that like, I don't play battle royale games, which is the type of game that we're making. I'm horrible at our game, but you know, that doesn't have anything to do with my job, which is good. So yeah, so it's definitely not a requirement, a plus in certain areas, but we appreciate, you know, the various skill sets outside that could help contribute.
Love that. And I am so thankful that Janelle asked this question. It was one of mine. Certainly, we know the history of the gaming industry, and I think this is why I'm so excited that Proletariat's a part of this discussion, because I know that you're different. But Janelle asked, you know, she's heard as a whole, the gaming industry can be tough for women getting in the industry and just being in the industry altogether, specifically being a woman of color. Have you experienced any kind of difficulties being a woman in that space, and any advice for those trying to get into an industry who might be hesitant?
Yeah, no, it's a very real thing. We were actually talking about this earlier. And, you know, it's something that we're definitely very, very aware of. And, you know, there's lots of scary stories out there. And the one thing I will say about Proletariat is that we really do care about this, and it's something that we focus on to prevent as much as possible. You know, personally, and I'll let the others speak for themselves, but I feel like Proletariat's done a really great job at being cognizant of these kinds of things, and we do our absolute best to make sure that it's a safe space for everybody. We also, regarding, you know, kind of getting in and I was thinking about our numbers earlier, and I wish I had exact figures, but in the past, we had a very, very, very small group of women in the office. And it's, you know, we're still definitely working on improving those numbers, but in the last year or so, the amount of women that we've hired has been almost equivalent to the number of men that we've hired in kind of our latest hiring boom. Like I said, we're very cognizant of these kinds of things, and I think we're making good progress.
So do you see that the industry, and I'm sorry, does anyone else have anything to add?
I was just gonna say it's so in the past few years especially, there's been some really, really big things that have happened in the game industry, like very big negative things, like starting with Gamergate, and then into the past year, there have been a lot of harassment suits going on at large companies that were previously muted for a very long time, and legally they were really trying to keep people from speaking out. So the game industry has a long history with this, and so it's like companies like ours especially are looking at that and becoming more aware that everybody who is contributing to the company needs to start recognizing things like bias and inclusivity and making sure that we are actively trying to do better. So whether or not a company has a history with that, there's still like a big opportunity and an obligation right now to do the best we can with the information that we're given and to try to make everybody more aware, open our eyes, and make it a better place. Because, you know, we're hiring all these women. The hope is that we're gonna kick that stuff out. So I'm hopeful. I've been doing this for a long time, and I've already seen a lot of change. And the fact that people are even talking about it is huge. So, and people feeling more comfortable about talking about these kinds of things is a really good thing. It's something that, again, we were talking about independently earlier, just because it is such a hot topic, and you don't want to lie to people about any difficulty they might be walking into. However, at the same time, we're at a huge time of opportunity, and that is a strength of a studio like ours, that we can recognize that.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add?
Yeah, if you want to know more about kind of a woman's perspective in the games industry, I actually read a great book called Feminism in Play. It talks about women as both, it talks about women in games, the representation, talks about women working on games, game industry, and it talks about content streamers and the discrimination that they face and some of the hardships they face. And being aware of kind of like what you're stepping into, I think can really help prepare you for things. Like, for example, in an interview question, they might ask you, what kind of games do you like to play? And you might answer something like, oh, I really like, I guess an example I can use like Candy Crush, right? Like, oh, I play Candy Crush all the time. And you can be looked down for that because it's not a gamer's game, right? Or it's not a game that people play. Or you can say something like for example, I never played Ocarina of Time when it came out because I didn't have a GameCube, right? Like, a lot of women have less access to game consoles and things when they're younger because parents are more likely to buy game consoles for boys, things like that, which can lead to discrimination. So being aware of those microaggressions and things like that, and being aware of kind of what kind of industry you're stepping into, reading articles, can really help prepare you mentally, but it can also help prepare you when you're researching a company and you're asking those questions, or when you're talking to somebody like a hiring manager and talking about like, what happens if this happens to me, like what's your policies and things like that, and you can kind of put that into place and know what to expect, because it does unfortunately happen. People have been amazed that I didn't play certain games when I'm younger, and it's made me feel uncomfortable, or people say things. I've never had like anything like harassment, but like, it's unfortunate, it does happen. And knowing kind of what that company does, like if I am harassed, like what things will be put into place is really important. And at Proletariat, it's taken super seriously. I've been told since day one, that's not acceptable, that things will be put into place if I do feel uncomfortable or disrespected and things like that. And that's a huge part of it as well.
That was so helpful. Thank you.
And the last thing, I think there was at the tail end of that question, the advice for those trying to get the industry who may be hesitant. I was in a position last year where I had to make a decision between basically like continuing to work in kind of the generic tech industry in a role that probably would have been good for me, or kind of dropping almost everything and just saying like, I want to go for this gaming thing and just kind of see where it takes me. And I had a lot of reservations about doing that because of kind of the state of the industry and the rumors I had heard about how women were treated and marginalized identities were treated and all of those things. But I think the biggest driver for me in doing it was a lot to do with the fact that when I tried to find a person to look up to and to be like, I want to be just like that person, I actually couldn't find one. And even though that's kind of discouraging, it also, I think sometimes if you're looking specifically for like, oh, I want to follow in that person's footsteps and you can't find a person to follow, then maybe you have to be that person. And that's what I had to tell myself was like, well, if I can't find like a half Asian product manager working in games that I can ask a lot of questions to, then I guess I need to be that person now in case another person just like me wants to be in the game industry down the line and wants to ask questions. So I think sometimes it can be discouraging when there aren't a whole lot of, now I think the way the industry is today is much, much different than it was a while back. But even if it looks like there aren't a lot of people like you in the industry already, that just means that you're a person that the industry needs to be that person and be potentially the first person to then usher in a whole new level of diversity that needs to be in it.
That was great. Thank you so much for sharing. It made me think of if there's any sort of organized mentorship specifically for women in gaming. I don't know if there is.
IGDA, I think, does have mentorship programs. That's the International Game Developers Association. If you're interested in joining the games industry, that would be a good industry to link up to. Discord, Facebook, a lot of organization things. And the women within those organizations have been very good. I mean, I know I've just through networking, I know several women narrative designers, writers who I've spoken to, talked to, looked up to. Of course, men as well, like, the people I worked with at ZeniMax Online Studios, very important to my mentorship, very important. But like, the woman I know, that's a special connection for me. Like those mentors mean something more to me because we share that we are a woman in this industry.
Love it.
Yeah.
Thank you. We have a question from Tara. She has several years of experience freelancing as a 3D character creature artist. Cool. And recently went through a coding bootcamp in order to learn about what the engineers do. Would that coding experience help chances of finding a job in a studio? And what would be the best way to showcase the combination?
So I saw this question coming up. Like, that's going to help you out. I did the exact same thing. I spent, again, years teaching 3D character art, and then was going back to school to do essentially like coding, I wanted to get into tech art, so I wanted to go that way. So I was in the middle of taking like calculus and C++ classes just to get ready to go to grad school. And I got an interview with Proletariat to come do 3D character art, which is like really what I wanted to do. And I was just having a hard time breaking into that specifically. So when I went into the interview, I realized that they really wanted to hear that I could talk to engineers and that I understood where my art was going and how to articulate my needs to the engineers was going to be important and still is important to recognize when I need help that they can give me and need resources that they can provide for me. And when you go into those interviews, you're not always just talking to artists. You're talking to different parts of it, like people representing different parts of the team. And if you can kind of speak their language, even though you're not trying to like play their game, you're not trying to, you're not trying to act like you're a master at what they do. But the fact that you have an interest and you actually have proven interest in what they do shows that you can be diverse, that you're not locked into just the one thing, and that you can work with people across all different disciplines, because that's going to be essential for career growth. Maybe not in the beginning, something that they're looking at too hard, but if you really want to have more ownership, you know, grow your career, get more into management, you have to have those skills too. And anything you do that is not directly related to this small piece that you're contributing is going to be incredibly helpful. And, you know, when an artist can also math it up a little bit, it's pretty big. So we definitely love to see that. And, you know, our tools are pretty technical too. So understanding why things are broken and what you can do maybe to fix them a little bit better than just kind of button mashing until it works is, you know, really important to art, to anybody doing any kind of like technical art like this.
God, I've never heard of button mashing. That's fantastic. That is like literally what I do much too often. So thank you for that visual. Anyone else have anything to add to that? Nothing. I gotta tell you, the folks on the chat had asked a bunch of the questions I was going to ask anyway. Someone, Valencia, just wrote, does it work the other way where a programmer can understand the design and artistic aspects of it and how that works? I would imagine.
Yeah, I would say absolutely. Any way you can like reach across a discipline, to, even if it's just for communication purposes, it's incredibly useful to have that. It's always important to be like, for art to be specialized at something, so you sort of always have, you know, that one area, but anywhere you can reach across is always going to be helpful.
Also, knowing something's cross-discipline can open some doors for you if later on down the line you realize that, you know, maybe you want to go into something that's a little bit more like a project manager, and want to go into production. Because I think I've known a lot of people who ended up working as producers but started out in a different discipline and then realized that they much more enjoyed managing and assisting other people and helping to organize everyone to get work done. And knowing multiple disciplines really kind of gives you an edge if you realize that you want to go into one of those positions, because then you aren't just kind of locked into just doing one thing. Now you know that you could be a producer and you could produce both engineers and artists. And that's like a really, really useful skill to have if that happens down the line.
You also might have a role that is multiple disciplines, especially for smaller studios. If your studio is 12 people, you know, you're a writer, but you're also a programmer, but you're also an artist. You know, the more you can know, the more you can apply that, and the more you can work towards some industry experience, and then maybe branch out into a role that's specific towards something that you really, really like. You know, I started as, you know, mainly writing at ZeniMax, and now I'm more of a content narrative designer at Proletariat because I had that cross-discipline experience.
I'm curious because a couple of people have mentioned some degrees. Do you find that having a degree is pretty crucial to working at Proletariat or the gaming industry in general? Or is it more like, you know, boot camp or sort of on the job kind of, or, you know, going to the game jam and just like learning it without formal education? Is there any sort of preference?
We don't necessarily have a preference. I think it's going to always depend on the role, and it's always nice to see that somebody did go to, you know, get that professional background or education. However, there are a lot of roles where it might not even be considered, to be honest. You know, with art, we look at portfolios more than we look at educational backgrounds. If you have done the work, that's really the thing that's going to speak most highly. You know, if you, you know, when you come in and you apply for an engineering role, we're going to send you an engineering test. So it's, you know, you can say you went to school, but if you can't complete the test, you know, there's that kind of thing. So my favorite answer is it always depends. But like I said, if you've done the work, that's going to speak really highly.
That actually reminded me of a question I was going to ask, and you started to answer to when you're talking about the engineering piece of it, is what is the recruiting process like at Proletariat?
So I'll give you a quick start to finish. There's two ways people can come in. It's either through an external application. We do also have a referral program within Proletariat, because a lot of roles do come through or get filled through referrals, which is great. And that kind of goes back to the whole networking and being connected type of thing. So when we initially get an application, we'll have our recruiters take a look for screening purposes. The hiring managers will also do a screening, and we'll reach out to have a phone call just to make sure that everybody's kind of aligned with expectations about the role. The interview process itself, it can vary based on the role itself, the level of experience required, you know, the type of job that you'll actually be doing. So Tori and Stef can probably talk about their interview process. We, you know, after we do a couple of phone screenings, bring people in for kind of a full day of interviews to really cover all the bases. We try to involve as many people from as many disciplines as possible. That would be interacting with that person. And, you know, sometimes it involves, you know, engineering exercises, art test reviews, Tori and Stef, I don't know if you guys want to go through the process that you went through.
I really enjoy my interview, so I can talk about my interview.
Great.
So basically it was starting out with like a phone call. This is a full-time position. This is in Boston. This is our expectations. Just laid out a lot front that, you know, kind of showed that, for me, it showed that Proletariat was going to be very upfront and honest with you. So immediately I was like, very pleased with the process. I had 2 phone interviews. That was more traditional, like, where's your work? Like, what have you worked on? Here's some examples. What would you do if you were a narrative designer in a game like ours? Things like that. And then after those phone calls, I got an in-person interview. And so the whole day was basically me talking with various groups of people and creating a quest with them. So in the very beginning, I talked to a gameplay lead and the content lead, and they were like, here's a topic for a quest. Here's what the player can do during this quest. Create a quest chain for us. And I had a whiteboard, and I wrote out the quest chain. And then every time I met with a group of people, they had a little twist for me to do, like, okay, we're world builders. We want this to take place within this area. How do you connect your quest to this area of the game? And like, I would spin like, this is what we're gonna do. I would make tweaks and changes. I actually met with Stef that day. And
I had to bring you a second whiteboard.
Yes, so that was the second whiteboard that was entered in the room, where they asked for product needs, and they said, this is a product need we have, integrate this into your quest. And so then I integrated their product needs into my quest. So it was like half that during the hour, half a traditional interview, talk about my work experience, things like that, and like who I was as a person, you know, getting a personality, just make sure that, you know, I could mesh well with Proletariat and all that. And then at the end of the day, I met with, again, gameplay lead, content lead, and the CEO, Seth, and we went through my quest that as it was final iteration, and I talked about it. And at the end of the day, I was kind of like, I literally was like, if they don't want to hire me at this point, they shouldn't. Like, which I thought was a good interview process, right? So very interactive, very much like me showing off my direct skills, which was something that I was very impressed with, actually.
Nice.
And speaking from my past experience, you might have something like they ask you questions more traditionally, like, you know, if you could create any quest in our game, what would you create? Things like that. My kind of tidbits for like what you should do going into the interview is research the company really well and their values, research the game that you're working on or games that they have worked on, know the lore, know the gameplay, know what it's like, play it as much as you possibly can, show enthusiasm, show excitement, like, you know, I'm excited to work on this in the game, I'm excited to work for your company because of this reason. I talked about how much I liked Boston because I moved from Baltimore to Boston, things like that. And just showing like enthusiasm and knowledge and being prepared goes a super long way. Like, you know, if you're showing art examples, show art examples that we could put into Spellbreak. That's going to go a really long way towards like, you know, impressing the people who are hiring you. That went all a long time. I'm going to let Stef.
No, that's great.
I think Tori and I had different interview processes than a lot of the roles at Proletariat. It's up to the hiring manager kind of how they want to do the interviews. And both of the hiring managers for our experiences decided to put us through like a day-long simulation. I had to like basically write a case study as part of my interview process too. But that's mostly coming from a product management perspective, a really important skill is market research. So that was kind of just testing like, for our product managers, we want to make sure that people can do thorough market research and understand what makes other products and games good or not as good. So I think it was a little bit different in that regard. But in general, I think the interviews, I've been participating in a lot of interviews to represent the product team, and it's a lot of kind of the generic interview questions and just kind of, I think I am usually involved in the interviews from kind of a cultural fit perspective, or not really cultural fit, but culture add kind of perspective of, you know, when we're bringing you in for a final round interview, from what I know, and Sarah can correct me if I'm wrong in saying this, usually we're already pretty confident that you know your stuff, and there's a certain extra level of knowing your stuff that we want to get to know. But then a lot of it is like, can you actually work well at the company with us, because we're kind of like a medium-sized company. It's the expectation that everyone's going to be interfacing with each other very constantly, and so just making sure that you know whoever we're bringing in fits in with everyone, and also that they are comfortable working with everyone, because it's just as much an interview for them as it is for us. So just kind of checking to make sure that everyone can actually collaborate well together. And I think Proletariat so far, in the experience I've had with the interview process, does a pretty good job of making sure that everyone's checking that is something that is on the top of their mind. They're not just giving a technical test. They're saying like, can we actually communicate, and you know, can we get along with this person, and does this person get along with us?
Yeah, we try to put as much structure to our interview process as possible, just to make sure that it's as effective as possible. So, you know, we make sure we have standards that we ask our hiring managers to adhere to in terms of defining, you know, exactly what people should be focusing on for their interviews, and you know, making sure that we are all on the same page as far as expectations when we get in the room with those people, and that we're not just kind of winging it. And so yeah, like Steph said, I think it's been pretty successful so far.
That's great. And I'll just ask this question. I was going to ask relatedly, given everything that's virtual now, I'm curious, how is that working for you as a company? Have you always sort of had that remote work ability? Is it new? Do you see that this is, you know, everything we're seeing is that this is not a short-term thing? So can you talk a little bit about Proletariat in the age of Rona?
Yeah, for sure. So from a recruiting perspective and interviews and hiring, I have been touching base with our recruitment team almost on a daily basis, and we're all just kind of like, it's fine, everything's going great. And you know, we have a lot of technology to thank for that. But one of our biggest focuses when we moved into this fully remote work was just how we were going to stay connected, because communication is probably the biggest thing to keep us all afloat and keep us, you know, effective. And, you know, we do expect that, you know, because the world is scary, and because everybody's, you know, rapidly shifting to new work styles, that we might not be as productive as we were in the office. But I think that everybody's been doing a really amazing job. We've kind of just done this, we're in this together kind of thing, and made it work. You know, there's obviously hiccups with, you know, hardware and those kinds of things, and, you know, how we onboard people. So we're still learning a lot through this, but I think that overall, it's been going pretty well. And it's really showed us that, you know, in the past, we were not fully remote. We had some remote employees, but this has kind of opened our eyes a little bit as well to, you know, what other possibilities we have in this new world.
Wild. And are you postponing the interviews, like final interviews?
We are not. We're just doing them all virtually.
Cool.
Yeah.
Sorry, I think Kristen was about to say something.
I was just say, like, I think that this imposed remote work, that it actually has helped with communication in a lot of ways, because in, you know, walking into an office, there are physical barriers between people, and so you kind of end up interacting with the same people every day, just because they're in close proximity to you. And this has really changed that. I feel like I've gotten to know people that I really have been working with me for months, and I just hadn't ever really interacted with them. But because you're looking for socialization where you can get it, and I've actually, I feel like I've become closer to a lot of coworkers that I previously like barely ever talk to, if ever, just because we've grown so fast, and it's easy to kind of stay, you know, focused on exactly what's in front, like literally exactly what's in front of you, and not really get to, you know, not really reach out there. But it's in my opinion, I think it's been great for different, like, you know, bringing the studio kind of together as we're growing.
Wow. And I've got just a few minutes left. Laura asked Tori, primarily, I think, what do you look for most from writers? And do you have them on staff, or are they mostly freelance contract? And she's interested in how you got started with writing as a background.
So I am the studio's writer at the moment. I'm mainly a narrative content designer, just because we don't have as much writing as a game like ESO did, or Elder Scrolls Online did. But I am the writer on staff. That might change in the future. I don't know. We're kind of figuring stuff out. But yeah, so I was a teacher. I got a degree in English education, so I could teach, and I had an emphasis in creative writing because I was really interested in creative writing. So I, you know, took classes, you know, built up my experience. You know, you want to be a good writer to be a writer, I suppose. I decided to leave teaching. I joined ZeniMax QA. And then when I was in QA, I had a writer reach out to me because he knew I had an English background and English education background. Said, "Oh, we have a writing position open. Are you interested in joining? I'd love for somebody in QA to get, you know, this position." So I wrote a writing sample for them, which is a very important part of applying for any writing position. Basically, I wrote like dialogue that would be in the game, which goes a really long way. My dialogue sample was really well received. My interview went really well, and I got the position with really no professional writing background, which I'm very fortunate to be able to do. So I would say if you're looking to get into writing, networking is really important. Knowing what opportunities are open and opening them, getting some industry experience at all, even if it's not in writing, you know, it'll still help you in the long run. My QA experience was highly informative, and I'm, you know, in no way regrets having that experience. It's helped me a lot. Having a strong portfolio of writing. Twine is a good engine you can use. Twine you can make like narrative-based games with, and make like choices that have consequences and things like that. I'll type that out.
Yeah,
Twine.
awesome.
And things like that. Game jam still important. You can still be a writer in a game jam. Things like that. And just having understanding and honestly, I mean, reading books and reading, you know, things to help you be a better writer, but playing a lot of games and knowing game dialogue and game writing, you know, like I don't just write like, you know, books and games, like I don't write in novels, I write dialogue. So watching movies, watching TV shows, playing games, knowing how people speak and how short their sentences are, and having really concise writing is good. Knowing things like that, and how like boss barks and what people shout at you when you're fighting them, and what item descriptions do you think sound really good in the inventory, things like that. That's all part of being a writer for a video game. So yeah, totally. There's a lot of different ways to become a writer, but if you want anybody who like is interested in that, you can also reach out to me. Can I just put my Twitter up?
Totally. Yeah.
I can, like, you know, like I said, we want to, you know, have more, you know, a woman and non-binary people in the gaming industry. So you can reach out for me for personal questions or looking over anything, and I'd be happy to help you out as well, as a connection. Yeah.
That's so nice. Tori, you're so nice. And we've only got just a few minutes left, but I want to make sure that I get Brianna's question answered. What do you look for specifically from UI artists, and is UX design integrated at Proletariat?
I can speak a tiny bit to the UX part. Unfortunately, I am not an artist and I'm not on the art team, so I don't know much about how we look for UI artists in particular. But what I can say is that I work very closely, the product team and the UX/UI team work really closely together. Anytime we're trying to work on a feature or anything, pretty much immediately after we get kind of a set list of requirements down, it gets shipped off to UX to try and figure out how we make that something physical that the player can interact with. UX design, UX and UI are the same team at Proletariat, which has its pros and its cons. I think it's different at every company on whether or not they require the UI artists or UX designers to be able to do both. And at Proletariat right now, the team is responsible for doing both. I don't know if that's something that may change in the future or if this is how it's going to stay. But as for right now, that's kind of what we have going on as our structure.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Really appreciate you taking the time, and we will be making this available to folks afterwards. And yeah, I hope that more connections are made for the rest of this day. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks.